Hello and welcome to SME TV. I'm your host Angela Vithulkas, and this is our Friend or Foe segment. Society has always had the haves and the have-nots, but traditionally that was a financial or class divide. Now it's about whether you have a great NBN internet connection or you have not. Are you FTTP, FTTC, FTTN, or just F something? One thing's for sure, Australia deserves better broadband. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel to support us and all SMEs, and we encourage you to comment. Tell us what you think and share SME TV. Our guest today is the former CEO Executive Director of Internet Australia, the peak body representing internet users, and current Vice President of TelSoc, Laurie Patton. Welcome, Laurie.
Thanks very much.
Okay, NBN, friend or foe?
Oh, eventually a friend. At the moment it's a bit of a mixed bag depending upon whether you've got good broadband or bad broadband.
Is it all only just about speed?
No, it's about a number of things. It's about reliability. A lot of people have more problems with the connection than they do with the speed. But it's also about the upload speed as well as the downloads.
Okay, so there's connection issues,
Yep.
which I'm assuming is the infrastructure.
Yep.
And then there's speed issues.
Yes.
And you're stuffed if you've got both.
Well, if you've got
Both problems?
fibre to the node, FTTN, then you'll probably have both.
Right, if you're that lucky. Now, the state of the NBN, how did we get here, where we are?
100 years ago, we decided that everyone should have a telephone. In 2009, the then government decided that we should all have internet access, and that was the genesis of the National Broadband Network. Unfortunately, in 2013, Tony Abbott came along and decided to wreck the whole thing, and we went backwards. Instead of using modern fibre technology, we now use a mixture of all sorts of things, old copper wires, ageing pay TV cables, and things that just simply can't deliver 21st century broadband.
So that was the original grand plan was to have fibre everywhere.
Well, for 97% of the population, a few people would have satellite or fixed wireless.
Depending on where they were,
Yeah, but for the majority of people, fibre. And that's what we will end up with. It's just going to take us a lot longer to get there.
So as you've mentioned previously, it became and it is a political football.
It's been a political football ever since 2013. Well, even before then, but certainly since then, we've never been able to get any kind of bipartisan agreement.
Now, you've got an amazing background outside of broadband, and your background in both the media and politics and government and not-for-profit organisations, etc. You're not actually surprised that it's been treated like a political football or that egos have jumped in here?
I am actually, and I'm really disappointed. See, back when we started talking about the Snowy Mountain scheme, this was a Labor initiative by the Chifley government, and the then opposition leader, Robert Menzies, jumped around all over the place saying it was a disaster until he became the Prime Minister. When he became Prime Minister, he embraced it and owned it, basically. In fact, they fast-tracked one of the dams so that he could cut a ribbon and basically take ownership. What we needed was for Tony Abbott to do a Menzies and go, okay, I objected to it, you know, that was politics, but reality is we need a decent broadband network. What he decided to do was he instructed Malcolm Turnbull, who was his communications minister but also his arch rival, to demolish the National Broadband Network. Malcolm, in turn, went to some of his techie mates who gave him some very, very bad advice. They said, you can use the old telephone wires. You can use the old pay TV cables. Now, the problem is that Telstra, who owned the copper wires, had long since realised that they were out of date and would have to be replaced.
And they'd let it go.
And so they stopped anything other than basic maintenance. So fibre to the node...
Did Malcolm's mates not know that? Or they didn't care?
Well, I don't know. That's the question that we've never been able to get to the bottom of. Certainly in relation to the pay TV cables, Labor's advisors said they won't work. They were just going to buy the customers off Telstra and Optus. In the end, they've had to junk the entire Optus network, and it's now costing them a fortune to make the Telstra pay TV cables work. So all up, a project that Abbott and Turnbull said would cost less than 40 million has now cost more than 50 million, and there's probably another billion, another 10 billion
needed
to go to get it to where we would have been had we just stayed with fibre.
So inevitably we will end up with the product that we should have had
Well, I think so. I mean, we've gone from being number 30 in the world in terms of broadband speeds, which is nothing to write home about. We're now down around 60. So I just think ultimately business will say we need better broadband. And what we've found over the last few months with the coronavirus is more and more people are working from home.
So the silver lining here is the pandemic descended upon us and forced us into needing connectivity in a different way and exposed the issues more.
And what that will mean is that over time more people will want to work from home or will be required to work from home, and you need good broadband. It's not just about the download speed either. If you're working from home, you need fast upload because you're uploading files, you're doing Zoom conferences.
You're working.
Yeah.
Like you would in your
You will have seen a lot of Zoom conferences where the guest looks pretty ropey. That's because their upload speed's no good. It's fine for streaming videos because that's all going one way.
That's right. Yeah.
As soon as you try to get anything going the other way,
Try streaming a video up the other way.
You're in big trouble.
Like we have to do.
Yeah, that's right.
We never know. It could happen quickly or it could take 2 days.
Yep.
So
well, there are people in, say, Hollywood that are doing work with people in Australia, and sometimes it's actually faster to send a disc by plane. That's when we had planes.
And it shouldn't be. Yeah, when the planes could.
When we had planes.
Well, but this is the irony of the situation, right? Because now we have had to choose different ways of service. Medical, for instance. Yep. We can have telehealth consulting.
Telehealth's a really interesting one. There's a debate within the medical profession. I think there are some Luddites in the medical profession who are resistant to it, and there are some who say, "Oh, we can do it over the phone." The big advantage of telehealth is for people in regional and remote communities where they need to be able to talk to a specialist. It's not just about GPs. And if it's a specialist, then they're going to need to be able to exchange high-res scans and the like.
And see the patient.
And be able to see the patient, yeah. So, look, the good news is that they've made telehealth bulk billable during this period.
Yes.
Hopefully that will be extended because there are people in the bush who have to drive for 5 or 6 hours, sit in a waiting room for 45 minutes for a 5-minute consultation and then drive 5 hours back.
It's much less pressure in the pandemic now for the vulnerable people to also be able to embrace that. Yep. If they only need, my mum, she's a typical pensioner, she just needs scripts redone. Yep. It is silly to waste everyone's time for her to have to travel to expose herself to an environment and put pressure and stress on everyone else in there, including staff, to have to worry about something that's so silly and simple to do that he could literally do it over the phone. But he should get a look at her in between visits just to make sure that she is actually okay, because usually what we find is with our vulnerable people, they don't always express what's wrong.
You'd hope though that the doctor is actually seeing the patient and knowing it's them they're talking to.
Yeah, and I guess that's the other part.
It could be me ringing up pretending to be my dad.
And getting a script that you shouldn't have. Right. So it's bad enough we've got to show our driver's licence to get some decent cold medicine behind the counter. Okay, so we know that now what's happened is we've had the weaknesses exposed. We've ended up having everyone homeschool, which has been freaking everyone out a little bit too, parents included there. And we've had this massive amount of stress and pressure. We're going to see the fallout of all of that, where the decentralisation that you talk about, which will be a wonderful thing both for affordable housing, but also for not needing these big packed condensed city centres that we find, where people aren't allowed to get in the lifts anymore to get into their buildings, which is why they're staying away. That's going to be another silver lining, that we are going to have decentralisation served to us.
Well, we're already seeing that apparently. Real estate agents are reporting that they're getting more inquiries in the regions from people in the capital cities. The other thing is, quite frankly, I wouldn't be investing in high-rise office accommodation in the centre of Sydney or Melbourne, and all of those companies that embraced hot desking are now going to have to worry about how they're going to find the extra space, because nobody is going to want to share a desk.
No, the deep clean that would be required. The irony when they first started doing all the hot desking was that they actually never had enough desks for all their staff. They never estimated everyone would come in all at once.
Well, that was always the plan. They would hope that they would not be all there at the one time.
Now they hope they just all never come back in some way.
Well, I think what we'll find is that there'll be people who will work sometimes in the office, sometimes at home. There'll be people who'll be able to work from a regional office rather than from a capital city. So I think there's a lot of changes that will occur, but we're still back to basics, which is you can only do that if you've got good broadband.
And that's then you also talk about the post-COVID recovery and making our broadband part of that, including retraining people to redeploy them.
Well, the thing that TelSoc has suggested is that we actually should fund NBN Co to hire people to fix the broadband network and thereby create jobs.
And that's the whole part of the recovery, is that we've got to create the jobs and deliver something, a piece of infrastructure that has seriously put us behind the rest of the world and stopped us from seeing our capabilities grow as well. Because without that growth here, you know, you can imagine if you don't need to send a disc from Hollywood to Sydney via an aeroplane or a courier, that is faster than doing it online, which is absolutely stupid because the amount of money that you save in labour in doing that. But increasing our performance would see a lot of our startups also pivot and adapt to deliver different industries underneath that.
Well, we've already seen a lot of people leave Australia to set up their high-tech companies because they just couldn't get the support here. So
we're too far, and that's exactly right. This is the saddest infrastructure. Okay, do you think there is such a thing as a brave government who will embrace and resolve that?
Well, to his credit, Malcolm Turnbull talked about the innovation nation, but what we're struggling at the moment. So we need governments that actually understand how high-tech works. So, for example, at the moment, there are 6.5 million people out there with a thing called the COVID Safe app.
Yes.
It doesn't work. It's a complete and utter dud. It has not found one person that they didn't find through manual tracing. And the government is caught because who do they blame? Are they going to accept the blame themselves, or are they going to blame the people who built it for them and should have got it right in the first place? So before we can really move forward, we need to address the issue of why do we have all of these stuff-ups? You know, we've got a COVID Safe app, which we desperately need, that doesn't work. We had all sorts of problems with the census. We've got My Health Record, which people are just not using. There's a real problem that people don't trust government, and you can't blame them
to take on those projects,
because the IT experiences that they've had over the last few years, every one of those projects has basically had a problem. And I suspect that if you were to really drill down, one of the problems is that they're not prepared to embrace the industry. So what we would say at TelSoc or at Internet Australia is talk to the experts. There were plenty of people. It took one guy less than 4 hours to work out what was wrong with the COVID Safe app. And then it took him a week to get anybody in the Digital Transformation Agency that would talk to him. There are plenty of people out there who would have been able to help them. And the day it was launched, they knew it didn't work. They knew that it didn't work between iPhones. And there's a solution now. Apple and Google, this is extraordinary. This is really extraordinary. Apple and Google, who are fierce competitors, got together and came up with a joint solution. Our government won't embrace it.
So there is an inquiry being launched into
broadband.
Broadband.
A broadband.
I was trying to think of a nice way of saying it. Yes, so there's an inquiry being launched to investigate
the future which is something that TelSoc called for. We said to the government, all right, okay, we think that the National Broadband Network is a joke in its current form, but let's fix it. But along the way, let's look at why we want it. Let's go back to square one.
Yes.
Why do we need a National Broadband Network? And they've got Dina Schiff, who's ex-Telstra and very, very well regarded, and some very, very clever people on this group who are going to hopefully tell the government to pull their finger out.
So if we have the government, we have an inquiry. We know that sometimes the results of inquiries and the recommendations are either put aside or not followed. So let's be hopeful that that's not the case there. But then, as you said, that people are worried because in general, when governments take on big IT projects, they stuff them up. So if the government was a business and wanted to launch a new app into the market, and COVID being the app, they wouldn't have got it out to market in that state.
No.
Right?
And when
they wouldn't have got funding for it, and it would never have gone to market.
No, and when the Digital Transformation Agency was interrogated in a Senate inquiry, it became very obvious that they didn't go through the basic protocols of testing before they launched it. But look, it's not just the problems of the technology; it's the problems of the process. And so, for example, with the National Broadband Network, there are fantastic people working at NBN Co, and they go to work every day hoping that the government will eventually let them build something 21st century. So it's really, there's two problems. There's the technical expertise. There's plenty of it out there.
We have it here. It's
the government being prepared to listen.
Yep.
And that's the problem.
There is, as I understand, that I read that you are hopeful that some kind of committee can be set up where these IT projects are vetted.
Well, hopefully this committee that's just been set up will do some of that.
Expose.
Look, there are all manner of inquiries. Like a board of directors
that might approve the next move of a company, but somewhere for the vetting process where, we've got issues with cybersecurity. So anything to do with tech and infrastructure really should be optimised at its very best.
The question you've got to ask yourself is, do we have a bunch of public servants not prepared to stand up to the government, or do we have a bunch of public servants who are being ignored? And I don't know the answer to that.
That's a scary concept either way, because some of these bureaucrats are well paid and they supposedly have KPIs linked to them these days. So they're not,
There's no accountability.
No, there isn't.
There is no accountability.
Or transparency.
And if you go back, so once upon a time, we pretend that we have a Westminster parliamentary system. Mm-hmm. Under the Westminster system, whenever there's a problem, the minister resigns. When did we have a minister resign over a stuff-up? More to the point, if the minister's not going to be held responsible, who is?
Yes.
So, for example, with the Ruby Princess, I reckon it would probably take a good investigator about 2 hours to find out who got that wrong. And then they should just be demoted or whatever you do with them. I'm not for sacking people, but let's find out who got it wrong.
Redeployed.
Because if no one is ever held accountable, if no one ever pays a price,
there's no consequence,
then there's no consequences. And that's the problem with the COVID Safe app. The Prime Minister went on the 7:30 program the other night and misled the public. It's as simple as that. He said COVID Safe is helping, and yet his advisors, his medical advisors, 2 or 3 of them, and including one of his ministers, Stuart Robert, has conceded COVID Safe has not found one person that they didn't already know about through manual contact tracing.
Which is why they're enforcing now wanting to record customers and get their details. Because
that's exactly right, but that's only part of the problem. What we really need the app to do is to find the people that you bumped into. So that's the whole point of it. Everybody can remember.
That's what it's for.
Yeah, everybody can remember
where they were yesterday.
The relatives and the friends they've been with in the last 14 days. It's the people you can't remember that really matter. And so there are people all over this country who've run into someone who's infected, potentially become infected themselves, and we know that it's sometimes you don't know for a week after
you're asymptomatic.
You're asymptomatic, and they're out there infecting other people. The problem they've got in Victoria and in New South Wales increasingly is the spread before we find out who's got the virus.
That's the mainstream part of that. The wild cards are the people who are behaving irresponsibly when they do have an idea of it.
And there are other countries that have got an app that works.
And this is, without getting too excited about it, this is what annoys me the most, is that there is already a product that works somewhere else.
Yes.
Why did we need to reinvent the wheel? Badly. Like we've put a square wheel, right, in the round hole of a vehicle, and then we've stood back and gone, oh, it doesn't work now. And I don't want to wrap this up without talking about New Zealand and how they've got broadband working.
Well, New Zealand is very simple.
That's sad.
They stuck with fibre.
Yeah.
And the really important point is by sticking with fibre, they got better and better and better, and now it costs them almost half per premises as it did when they started. They just got better and better at it. So had we stayed with fibre, we would have reduced the price that it cost for each person. And to be fair, the experts who advised Stephen Conroy, the minister, said that that's what would happen.
And we have a country that is going to be stand out in all things besides sport. They're going to kill it in everything because we've just ignored what smart people have said. You've got New Zealand who's winning the race on broadband. Yep. Probably Hollywood will be sending stuff to New Zealand. It'll be faster, than dealing with us. And yet we have a system which more and more is becoming like the comedy show of Yes Minister, with our government operating in a way of...
Remember the episode of the hospital with no patients? It was the most effective hospital in the system.
But that's what we've got at the moment. You can get served very quickly now if you go to any of the hospitals because they only let 1 in 10 in. So the disappointing part here is that we can trace back all of these issues back to a poor performance in government.
Yes, a lack of accountability and a lack of common sense, I think, is really what we're missing.
In your years of experience, not decades, I'll just say years, in your years of experience and what you have seen, why aren't we learning any different?
If I knew the answer to that, I'd be able to fix it.
Okay. Well, I don't know the answer to that either. No. Thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
It's been a great pleasure. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can support us and all SMEs and you can see other great interviews, something that will inspire you in your day-to-day business. A big shout out to the SMEA Association for their support of SME TV and another shout out to Piedmont Studio for their great production. If you have any tips, tricks, comments, stories, anything at all, please send them directly to me. news@smea.org.au and we're across all the socials. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Laurie.
Thank you very much.